founders think about the go-to-market as a post activity versus doing it early on. So meaning they are really of over-focus on technology alone and thinking when the technology will be, the product will be launched, that's when the customers will come. Especially like if the founders are engineers or coming from a medical background, this is their domain. This is where this is their comfort zone. So they are really focusing on the technology. And that's true. This is like bigger competitive advantage. But the commercial part, the getting really early on understanding who are the market, what's the feedback, even integrating that into a building technology is so important.
Most B2B tech startups hit a wall when founder-led marketing stalls growth. When they analyze where they went wrong, they almost always assume they have a demand problem. But when you look deeper, you realize that their real pain point lies in their positioning and go-to-market architecture. So how can B2B startups fix their positioning architecture problem to ignite more robust and sustainable growth? Welcome to this episode of the B2B Marketers on a Mission podcast, and I'm your host, Christian Klepp. Today, I'll be talking to Adrijana Daragon, who will be answering this question. She's the founder at Go-to-Market Advantage, who helps turn go-to-market into a predictable pipeline and revenue for B2B tech startups. Let's dive right in. Okay, and off we go. I'm going to say Adrijana Daragon, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me, Christian.
Great to be connected again, Adrijana. And I'm going to say thank you to Anna Wondani from Hey CMO for connecting us. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because we're going to talk about something that on the surface doesn't seem like it's extremely important, but we're going to start unpacking that. And then we'll realize like, oh, wow, we really should be paying attention to this, take some notes, learn and be inspired, no?
Yes, true. I'm really excited about it, and I can see really quite some founders can benefit from this knowledge.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you don't mind, we'll just jump straight in, and I'll ask you the first question. So I'm going to say, on a mission to help B2B tech scale-ups grow and increase their inbound leads. But for this conversation, I'd like to focus on this following topic, and then we can unpack it from there. So that topic is how B2B startups can fix their positioning architecture problem. Now, that sounds like a really fancy marketing term, but we're going to unpack it now, and then everybody will realize like how crucial this actually is. So I'm going to kick off this conversation with the following question. So Adrijana, in our previous conversation, you mentioned that most B2B startups think they have a demand problem. But in reality, when you dig deeper, what they actually have is a positioning and go-to-market architecture problem. So can you please explain that?
Sure. So it's highly depends on the stage the startup scale up is. It's different challenges. There are different challenges at the beginning. When there is early stage startup is about just doing different tests, trying. The founders typically the one driving the sales and marketing efforts and connecting, getting the early feedback, validating it. Afterwards, when it starts to be already, you gain traction, you had a successful, especially in deep tech, it's a lot about the pilots, securing those successful pilots, moving from the pilots to the ongoing client relationships. That's when it becomes much more about challenge of not only testing different activities, but really seeing how what really makes sense. Because there are a lot of challenges when you have a lot of activities, but they don't bring the results. They don't bring the revenue you want. And that's especially when I work with startups, when we have both conversations. We have the initial demand, interest, especially interest. We have those conversations with potential clients. However, they don't convert. And that's really where we are talking about the not originally positioning itself a problem, but it's also about the go-to-market. And one big mistake clients do is when they focus on the target ICP, but the target ICP, it doesn't have a sense of urgency to buy. So the purchasing intent is not there. So that's why, like, a lot of times you have a lot of conversations. Everybody says, "Oh, your solution looks really interesting." However, that doesn't result in the sales.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you brought up some really great points there, and I had two follow-up questions for you. So I think
Mhm.
the first one, especially when you're talking about startups, and I can't help but ask you this question, but do you sometimes feel when you're interacting with your clients, especially when you're trying to address these problems with them, do you sometimes feel that it's the founder that is the bottleneck?
It's true as well, like, as a startup
Mm,
grows, as well, the founder learns a lot, and it's a big growth journey as well, big growth journey, and as well, activities we do, the mindset also shifts with every stage. So there are like different stages of a company when it's founding team. It's small team with when you bring the first hires, the first outsourcing. That depends already where you need to communicate clearly, to delegate what you want actually to achieve, so these people know your vision and goals. That's really when it starts to be the first bottleneck of really making, when you are bringing more people, how they can work most effectively as well as a team.
yeah, yeah, no, no, absolutely, absolutely. So that's the first question. The second question is, and I know you and I both know what positioning is, but I feel for people outside the marketing discipline, they throw that statement or that word around very freely. So let's just clear the air there a little bit and just please break it down for us. What does positioning mean, and how is it relevant to inbound and revenue and other things like that?
I think there are multiple aspects, but the positioning is more what do you want to stand in the minds of and hearts of other people. How do you want to be for them? Be remembered. So it's not only remembered so that people can say and articulate also well what you do for yourself, and then obviously ideally that also it's repeatable, that also the clients and the rest can say. And that's not that easy sounds, that it's not only one statement, positioning statement, and then it's all done. Positioning is a lot about work together about the ICP, and for the ideal client profile. And that's a lot about understanding, especially if it is multiple industries, multiple, especially on enterprises, or like there are big buying cycles. Who are the right people? So it's a buying center. There are a lot of people who are users, who are economical buyers, decision makers. So this is a lot about work on this ICP, and the value propositions for each of them will be different. So the positioning work also includes this value propositions, to especially linking what's the value, what are the problems they have, and how you help your solution helps that to work. So it's like customer-centric communication about the solution, which is very hard sometimes for the tech startups who are typically over investing in the technology, and they talk about the features, but not so much in the customer language, about really deeply understanding customer, understanding who they are, and what they do, what are the problems, and how it solves. And the big missing piece, and which is what I have in my methodology where I work, and this is really important, crucial part not to miss, is the part of when. Not only who, but when. And the when part is about urgency, sense of urgency. Does the target ICP know that we have this problem? They are aware about it. Do they actively seek solutions? And you are at this stage. So because the right person, but the wrong moment, zero outcome. So it's the sale will not be done. So this is especially important why a lot of pilot conversations, after discovery call stall, is because of this, that they have this interest. However, the urgency is not there. And it's a lot, especially with the good AI solutions, or like really talking about long-term innovations, because it requires a lot of change of the behavior, system, processes, how we work currently, with how we do business currently. We are aware about this problem, but are we really actively looking to change solution? And currently, that's very important part of as well work of this overall positioning. because that will mean otherwise you just have a lot of conversations and really very small amount of them leading to the really closed deals.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I like how you said like right person, wrong time. That almost sounds like a dating situation, right?
Yeah.
But it's also transferable to the world of like customers, right? And that's absolutely true, because if you identify the right target audience, but this is not the right time, right? Because it's a different, because you always have to look at the different stages of their journey, right?
Yes.
And unfortunately in B2B, whether it's tech or otherwise, the buyer cycles tend to be a bit longer, right?
Yes.
All right, absolutely. So based on what you said, and I know you brought up already one of them, but like based on what you've said in the past couple of minutes, what are some of the key pitfalls you would say B2B marketing teams need to avoid, and what should they do instead?
Yes. So for me, really, I see that founders think about the go-to-market as a post activity versus doing it early on. So meaning they are really of over focus on technology alone and thinking when the technology will be, the product will be launched, that's when the customers will come. That's the one that typically, especially like if the founders are engineers or coming from the medical background, this is their domain. This is where this is their comfort zone. So they are really focusing on the technology, and that's true. This is like bigger competitive advantage. But the commercial part, the getting really early on understanding who are the market, what's the feedback, even integrating that into a building technology is so important. So that's the common pitfall about starting it early. It needs to be still very lean. In beginning, it's more lean. And one of the key things of lean activities is about thinking who are the who are the right customers, and then having that early validation. So it follows also to the second point. So one was the early think about go-to-market earlier than you typically do. Second is real versus fake interest. So what I mean, a lot of founders live in a more sometimes in the bubble of the ecosystem, meaning like they get the early positive feedback from incubators, accelerators they are in, as well the different support groups, plus also our startup founders saying, oh, your solution, can you give me feedback on your solution? Yes, it sounds interesting. Your technology is really interesting. Yeah, it should be interesting. And that's what we take it as a given feedback. Okay, I validated, I got this initial interest. However, this is not the target audience who would actually buy. So these are the kind of, I call it fake validation. It's good to get also support system to get this because it's really long journey, entrepreneurship and building the startup. You need this support system. However, you also need to have reality checks. And the reality checks are really thinking and going in the market and having conversations. If you are having the solution, let's say in medtech, selling to the hospitals. So then going and actually talking to a few, how does it sound? That obviously it's harder to get into that contact. There are some ways we could do it, but this is really very critical moment when you get the actual feedback from the person who will be so valuable in creating your product. And then also, what are the different criteria they look at? What is really what are the propositions we are looking at, and how we make the decisions? And that's very important as well to make sure that you get that early on. So these are the few pitfalls, I would say.
These are the few pitfalls, but they are super important.
Oh, yes.
They are so important that I have to ask you some follow-up questions. Okay. So based on the first one, right, when you're talking about who are the right customers and getting that early validation, how, in your experience, is there a right way to get early validation?
There is not only one way. There are many ways, but it's just very important is also the mindset of it's active listening. It's more about you have your own idea and you are in love with your product. That's why you have a startup. It's also very important to be open for the feedback. And good and bad feedback is also very important. So there are some, like typically, like also for the research, where you don't guide with questions, yes or no. You want to dig deeper. That's also very important. It's more, I think, it's the mindset with you really eager to learn. You go there to eager to learn and to really listen and to understand. That's the journey when you want to understand your potential client, how you can really make their life easier. That's the way. It will be ongoing journey where it's really almost saying that the product market fit happens also very similar time when you can describe and talk the problem of the customer better than the customer himself or herself. So it's a journey. So you will, but this is like really knowing that it's important to hear from them versus have only the inside view, which is and really seeking those conversations and have this open mindset is super important.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. I totally agree with that. Okay, so that was the first follow-up question. The second follow-up question, which I think is so important based on what you said, this reality check, right? Because I have some experience with this as well. Like it's especially talking with a founder and their team, and I always call it like the internal high five, right? The internal high five means, okay, we built a great product, boom, fantastic, and then internally it's like, I believe the market needs this because of da 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 da, and I don't agree that they need this because of whatever the reason, and everybody internally agrees.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I both know that as marketers, it doesn't help them and it doesn't help us to just
Mm-hmm.
agree with a lot of these, I'm calling them internal hypotheses.
Mm-hmm.
So from your experience, how do you get these startups, the founders and their teams, to accept that while you can have this hypothesis, you also need to have a proper reality check to validate everything that you're saying internally? Because sometimes, as you well know, not all founders, but many founders, it's the mindset internally is, my baby is the most beautiful baby in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you dare insult my baby. All right. So how do you get them out of this mindset? How do you get them to be like, okay, in order to grow, in order to scale, you have to be open to validation from the market? How do you get them to that point?
Sure. So I think here it's super important is to have different people in your support system and very in a close network. And part of the founders have the personal network, especially when they we have advisory boards, part of a board who are really typically people come from the industries, or we have also have done the startups. So it could be founders who have successful exits, or it can be especially in some specialized tech. It can be really coming advisors from the industry who really know more about the target clients, what's the problem and how, and the typical challenges the startup can occur. And that's very important about utilizing it well. So it's also up to the person who is, if it's they have active role as an advisor or the senior expert or like even a fractional person who really can help and structure or some of go to market, is really to have this open dialogue. So it's not about really just exactly have this consensus atmosphere that it's okay what the founder is saying, then we would just would work on this. It's very important to challenge that and to challenge that early on, because that's when it's really this diversity of expertise, and especially this relevant expertise, is super important to build around and actually leverage in the right way, asking the big questions, not working in the silos. So it's more about really that sometimes with advisory boards, they are more the name. It's more for the VC plus also for some of presentations, events, so for more of trust building. However, it's really as well how I see the founders who get much more benefit is really who use the senior experts in the right way of having almost milestone checks, really saying this is what we are working on. Let's look back, and this is why we didn't gain those pilots. Why we did a lot of effort. We had a lot of conversations with those enterprises, but it doesn't go anywhere. Let's review that. And it's more like bringing one level higher of really bird view and challenge some of the assumptions which were there before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what you said is also really important, getting everybody to stop working in silos, right?
Mm-hmm.
And exposing them to the bigger ecosystem. So we were talking about like dealing with pushback, and unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask you for more advice on that, because the next question is about something that I think you're very familiar with, right? Because you're dealing with a lot of these B2B tech startups. How do you deal with pushback from founders? When you tell them that, listen, you don't have a demand problem, you have a positioning and go-to-market architecture problem. And they look at you as if you're like, well, what are you talking about, right? What is this positioning? What is this go-to-market architecture? This sounds to me like a waste of time, right? But how do you convince them that it's in fact in their interest to deal with this? And how do you deal with that pushback?
Yes, it's more. It also depends on the stage, like how big it is. Not over engineer some of the activities early on. So it's yes, the demand is needed, but there's also that the big risk is if they put, especially they get sometimes the funding and they press P dial on marketing budget, advertising. I have seen that, and they are not very, very clear who are the right client, and especially as we talked, who then do they especially in a bigger organizations targeting. So we could really put a lot of advertising in the right target audience with a wrong message. And they could, no surprise, the results don't come afterwards. The deals are not coming. Those people, they might join your mailing list, webinar, and that's so far as they get, because they most probably were just interested in what's new out there. However, they are not really the right person who in the organization deciding this. All it is really about your messaging didn't connect to the problem, and they wouldn't even book a call afterwards with the sales team. So this is the way I see it's where it's really about looking overall about full funnel, not only about saying if we get big volume of people leads, then everything will be okay. It's much more about lower volume, but of the right leads. That will create less chaos, less activity, because you can really mistake a lot of activity will give a lot good results. It's more sometimes really stripping down, seeing really what's working, and it requires somebody who would understand that. Really looking at the data, looking what are the different tests, what resonates. This is the stage when you typically did some tests. Early on, you are still at the stage of trying and working and understanding, but at the stage when you did some, now it's a time to really look at it, review, and see where you double down and what you don't focus on. It's always, I think it's in sales and marketing is a lot about where do you put priorities, where do you focus on, I think sometimes less activities, but really very clearly can really simplify also the team effort to get into those deals, because sometimes the deals had stalled in the middle, but you didn't have time because you were so busy. But if you would take time, review it, maybe adjust the positioning, and then revive the conversation, that could lead to this to big ticket or deal. And that will be much more important versus doing the extra trials on marketing for.
That's exactly it. And I think you hit on something that is worth repeating. it's also a lot about the strategy, right? Like a lot of startups that I've seen, they jump straight into the execution, right? Like you talked about it, like ads and lead generation, and I'm not saying that those things are not important. They are, but if you don't have that understanding of who the target audience is, and you don't have a strategy in terms of like how you're going to approach the market, you're just going to be burning through money. And you and I both know how much
Oh
ads
yes.
cost,
Oh
right?
yes.
And
Oh
if you
yes.
don't know what you're doing, it's like a vacuum cleaner, no? Right? It's all gone, right? But you touched on something that I think it's worth revisiting and going back to, because it's, again, I know it might sound a bit repetitive, but why is it so important for them to understand or have a deep understanding about who this potential customer is, right? Why is it important for them to know that? And why is it important for them to understand the buyer's journey? Because, depending on what stage of the journey these people are in, they may have different motivations, or they may have different reasons for looking for a product or solution.
I think it's really important. That will make or break your traction, and more, and that's really the part of understanding and speaking about the customer, sometimes even better than the customer themselves, makes the customer really feel you understand, you are credible, you build, I can trust you. And that's really, it's a speed dial. It's a speed dial to really to the traction. To really, this is what is important part, is to, especially in B2B, it's building credibility and trust, so that you really know, yes, you have a great credentials in terms of a technology, the solution. That's important part. However, equally is also important the understanding commercially how this technology can help your customers. It's really about your customers, especially when we talk about, you mentioned about buying centers and complex organizations. That's when it's really thereby, it's a lot about reducing risks. It's a lot about minimizing transition costs. So it's more about that you are not really too risky for them to buy from. And it goes beyond the technology. It's a lot about understanding and talking in the language of a customer that you have discovered very clearly, very proactively first in your mind, then afterwards all in your communication. And this is where it comes. The strategy is super important, but I see it's not the strategy where you need just a document, somebody quickly did it, or like now it's a AI or somebody out of touch. It requires as well real validation. So that's where it's important. The strategy with validation, which is not on paper document. It's really about kind of almost agreement of what's the core, what we are trying to achieve, and how the way we're trying to achieve that. So this helps you is for the founder, for the rest of the team, and when we are talking about gaining traction, bring the rest of together. The strategy changes over time. Some elements, the market also adjusts, technologies adjust, but this is super important part of. Stop wasting time on of doing too many activities, and really looking at what really will move a needle.
Wait a second. You mean that the strategy has to be adjusted? I thought the strategy is just something you do one time and then you forget about it. Nothing.
I think that's what it gets a lot of times. I think it's as well in tech companies.
Yeah.
They do, especially early stages, the pitch documents, thinking overall. That's the part of saying what's the addressable market. So say we have our covered. We have our go-to-market. We have our plan. It's great. It gives us some of it's already good starting points, but there is much more on that. It's really ongoingly effort, and that's why it's why there are really the teams who succeed is really the founder is leading the sales and marketing organization, and then they are close to the customer. So it's not only to the product, but we need to be close to the customer, and then they are like really bridging the gaps as well as they go, because it's also the different challenges. But being close to the customer and hearing that and not working in a silo and bringing back that knowledge is super important. And so it's that document changes a lot of times. It's not 180 story. Sometimes it will be big pivots. There are pivots as well. You scrap your current product and you see that some of the one leg can really move forward. Like there are examples like Spotify and others where they started and they landed.
Yep.
But this is a movie. It's a moving piece, not one set in stone piece.
Right. So I think for this next question, if you really want to get very deep, it will take us several hours to talk about it. But just in the interest of time, maybe you can just give us a top level perspective, right? Just based on your own experience, walk us through how the B2B startups should fix their positioning and go-to-market architecture problems. So just give us the key steps. What are the key components that need to be in that process?
I think it's in beginning, especially, it's important of looking at and picking one target customer. So one industry, one target customer, thinking about your resources. It's a lot about your resources. Especially a lot of technologies are agnostic. So that's the typical pitfall of saying it's for everyone, but it's almost for nobody. Really. So it's about picking one of the customer target, and that typically comes either which one you are familiar with, where you come from, or you have great access to as well. So it's really there you can see it helps you to validate early, to get access to real people, talk to them, to get that feedback, fine tune, and not overdevelop MVP. MVP, like the first products a lot of times as well, because that's like what we talked, that it comes together that MVP, it will be most of the times you will scratch it. You will build next level moving forward. But this will help you to launch and iterate faster and not overspend time. There is a difference in deep tech. It takes time, sometimes 10 years based on the research. So there are nuances as well. So it's not there as well. But this is the important part of narrowing the focus in beginning will help you to go faster. And to really get the right customers. And it's very important to validate that with few customers, not only one, to really see if it is a scalable solution. So here we're talking about the depth and breadth of the customers early on. So here we are talking about, because sometimes here the risk is of choosing one customer. It's almost fully designing it for that customer to the point that is almost only relevant to that customer based on their requirements. So it's seeing how you could leverage that pilot that you can really also offer to others afterwards. So it's really thinking about the pilot in the right way. And here it's more about who would be the few clients and how deep you can go. So for the pilots, it can help you land in those companies, but afterwards, how you can move from the pilots to the full projects, which we pay the bigger scope projects. So this is very important. I think in a short period of time, I think that's the important part of thinking about how you could get this early traction, and the early traction which is scalable. So these are fundamentals of thinking of, okay, when you have this in the right way, then you see this breadth and depth of the customers, which you proved the point with multiple of the customers. When you got the feedback from the right customers, helps you to grow faster moving on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love how you also led with like narrowing the focus, and I think that's so important. A lot of startups, like you said, like, oh, okay, this is for different verticals, or we have customers in different industries. But in the beginning, if you have that mindset and you approach the market that way, and I think you brought it up earlier on in the conversation, you start to spread yourself so thin, and a lot of these
Mhm.
startups don't have 500 employees, right?
Mhm.
So it's a handful of people. Uh, if there's 10 people in the startup, that's already like wow, right? But there's only a few people, and especially there's only a few people responsible for business, right, and client acquisition. So if you start already in the beginning spreading them so thin, how are you ever going to scale, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. But okay, so maybe this is a question that you probably know the answer to, but I think it's really important to put it into context, because when you say narrow the focus, how do you get startups to narrow the focus, especially when they say, well, we built this tool and it's for different industries? How do you get them, and especially because there's a lot of people on LinkedIn saying, oh, narrowing the focus, that's lazy advice. I disagree with that, by the way. But how do you get them to narrow the focus? How do you get them to just zero in on one particular vertical?
So here I can give a few examples.
Mm,
I think it is here. It really depends on also the industry. How narrow is the
sure.
narrow?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
typically, my advice would be: you think that you are narrow, go even further.
Okay.
Go further, because it's not only the big industries, but who are within the industries, and specifically, if you are saying, let's say, it's a technology solution of improving the productivity, and you can for enterprises. That's typically a lot of enterprises. But if you choose one specific industry, saying these are the typically processes they have to improve, okay. But then there are a lot of teams, and within the teams there are also the hierarchy. So understanding really more specific use cases. So that's the typical way of thinking about where are the few use cases where you could really solve really well. And sometimes they come as exactly because you had the access to the market. You can really have it's easier for you. It's more accessible one. But it's also looking if it is can be repeatable, that there is potential as well moving forward. Forward. So there it's I think people are very scared, and the founders I work with, of being too narrow. But exactly as we talk, it's very small team. It's better to have 10 early pilots, but it's really then closed and you have strong learnings, versus 100 of nice to have conversations and maybe few but never really even have use cases closed in the multiple areas. This is where like it's happens that going narrow, it really helps. And in some very niche already solutions like robotics for the specific area, it takes really time as well to solve any problem, learn really depth about the customer. So you cannot spread yourself too thin on many customers there. So the time in deep tech it takes to solve a problem, this is where especially I recommend in deep tech, very specific area to get the traction. It's really important to get it's the narrow one, because this is where you invested a lot in the research, in your competitive also differentiation on what's the technology. So it's better solving really truly well for amount of customers, and that's really will build up versus of going broad and losing this even the trust and credibility in the market.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, as you were explaining this, which I think you explained really well, it almost sounds like you have to get them to conduct an experiment. You remember back in the school days, we were conducting
Yes.
experiments, and then we have to record the results, right? And then, okay, what worked? What didn't work? Okay, what worked? Scale. What didn't work? Stop, right? Or pivot Change the approach, right? We have to find out why didn't it work, right? What were the reasons? What was the feedback, right? So it's almost like you have to have this experimental slash growth mindset.
Yes, that's very important. I think it's this growth mindset is really where you are. It's continuous iteration and learning. It's learning as well. It's also about asking the questions, being in the asking the questions, having not this paralysis of no action. So you need to have action per your actions, but it's also thinking about what is it behind, what would really we need to do to make this pilot successful. And also when you are talking with a customer early on the pilot, super important is to ask, what needs to happen in this pilot? What are the success criteria for us to move from the pilot to the full project afterwards? So that's the one, like, it helps like as well to structure this experiments in the right way. Versus just when you are spreading too thin, you almost show the demos, give the solution, and then leaving the customer almost alone. So you didn't give full effort in those pilots as well to get the right, even the data behind.
Yeah, absolutely. Adrijana, this was such a great conversation, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise and experience with the listeners. So please give us a quick introduction and how people out there can get in touch with you, especially if they're in the B2B tech or health startup space in Switzerland and in Europe.
Yes, sure. So I am go-to-market advisor and fractional CMO or Chief Revenue Officer for B2B tech companies. I'm based in Switzerland. I operate with many European and also US companies who typically are still at the stage of founder-led sales and marketing activities. And I support them moving from heavy activity, random sales to repeatable way of winning deals. And my company is called Go-to-Market Advantage. So go-to-marketadvantage.ch. You can find also resources there as a quick diagnostic tool as well. So it's a free 5 minutes tool for them as well to get some of the low-hanging fruits, what typically go-to-market challenges we have, and it gives them as well some advice. And I'm happy to also share more of the discovery calls.
Fantastic. And we'll be sure to put a link in the show notes when this episode comes out. So once again, Adrijana, thanks so much for your time. Take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.